The woman who slapped me smiled while everyone watched. She thought she had just humiliated a desperate wife who refused to accept that her marriage was over. My husband stood beside her, and instead of asking if I was okay, he looked me in the eyes and said something that hurt far more than the slap. Security should have stopped you at the door. The entire ballroom erupted in whispers. Some people laughed. Others looked away, too uncomfortable to watch. I stood there with my cheek burning, my lip bleeding, and 400 strangers staring at me, as though I were the one who had ruined the evening. Not one person came to my defense. Not even the man I'd loved for 15 years. The man whose dreams I'd sacrificed my own career to help build. The man who once promised that no matter what happened, he would always stand beside me. Instead, he wrapped his arm around the woman who had just slapped me. She rested her head on his shoulder and smiled with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. "You should have stayed home, Abigail," she whispered. "This company belongs to people like us now." I looked around the magnificent ballroom. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Champagne glasses clinked softly. Executives in tailored suits pretended not to stare. Some were already recording the scene on their phones. Everyone thought they knew the story. They believed I was the bitter wife who couldn't let go. They believed my husband had finally found someone younger, prettier, and more successful. They believed I had shown up to beg him to come home. They were wrong. Every single one of them. Because I hadn't come to save my marriage. I hadn't come to fight another woman. And I certainly hadn't come to make a scene. I came because 48 hours earlier, I had signed a confidential agreement that would change every life in that ballroom, including my own. The people laughing at me didn't know it yet. My husband didn't know it. His mistress didn't know it. But before this night was over, the same woman who slapped me would have to explain to the entire company why she had assaulted her new boss. My name is Abigail Morgan, and this is the night betrayal gave me something far more valuable than revenge. It gave me my life back. Before we continue, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. If you love emotional stories filled with shocking twists, powerful life lessons, and satisfying endings, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story. The ballroom of the Lakeshore Grand Hotel had always been reserved for the biggest moments in Chicago's corporate world. I'd attended charity galas there, fundraisers, investment dinners, leadership conferences, but I'd never walked into that room carrying the weight I carried that evening. Every step felt heavier than the last. Not because I was afraid. Fear had left me months ago. What remained was something much quieter. Acceptance. The invitation rested inside my clutch, neatly folded. I didn't need to look at it again. I'd already read it dozens of times. Lawson Technologies cordially invites you to celebrate the beginning of a new era. Those words almost made me laugh. A new era. No one in that ballroom had the slightest idea how true those words really were. A valet had smiled as he opened my car door only minutes earlier. "Big night?" he'd asked. I smiled back. You could say that. If only he knew. I paused outside the ballroom doors and caught my reflection in the polished brass frame. Navy blue satin dress. Simple pearl earrings. A silver bracelet my late mother had given me on my wedding day. No flashy diamonds. No designer labels screaming for attention. I'd spent years learning that confidence didn't come from what you wore. It came from knowing exactly who you were. The doors opened. Warm light spilled across the hallway. Conversations drifted toward me. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with expensive perfume. A jazz quartet played softly near the stage. Waiters moved gracefully through the crowd carrying trays of champagne. Everything looked elegant. Perfect. Almost too perfect. I stepped inside. Within seconds, I felt it. That familiar sensation of people trying not to stare while staring anyway. Some recognized me, others didn't. A few whispered. I ignored them all. My eyes searched the room until they found Richard Lawson standing near the stage. Even from across the ballroom, he noticed me. He offered the smallest nod. It wasn't a greeting. It was reassurance. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The official announcement wouldn't happen for another 20 minutes. Until then, I was simply another guest. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. No champagne. I wanted my mind perfectly clear tonight. As I admired the skyline visible through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, memories I had fought to bury began surfacing. This wasn't the first corporate event I'd attended. Years ago, Ethan used to insist I accompany him. He would proudly introduce me. "This is my wife, Abigail." He'd hold my hand, smile at me, look at me like I was the best decision he'd ever made. Back then, I believed him. People often ask when a marriage begins to die. They expect a dramatic answer. An affair, a huge argument, someone walking out. But they're usually wrong. Most marriages don't collapse overnight. They erode quietly, like waves wearing down a cliff. One disappointment at a time. One ignored conversation. One broken promise. Until one day you wake up beside a stranger, wearing the face of the person you once loved. That's exactly what happened to Ethan and me. The first change seemed harmless. Longer work hours, then weekend meetings, then business trips that somehow required brand new cologne and tailored suits. When I asked questions, he always had answers, logical answers, convincing answers. I wanted to believe them because believing them was easier than facing the truth. Then came our 15th wedding anniversary. I made reservations at the little Italian restaurant where he'd proposed. I wore the same perfume I'd worn that night. I even brought the photo from our honeymoon, planning to surprise him. I waited 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. He never came. When he finally called after midnight, his voice sounded irritated. "I'm still in a meeting. I'm sorry. We'll celebrate another time." We never did. A week later, while folding laundry, I found a hotel receipt inside the pocket of one of his jackets. 2 guests, 1 room, champagne, room service for breakfast. The date matched our anniversary. I remember sitting on the bedroom floor staring at that receipt for nearly an hour. Not crying, just staring. Sometimes the truth doesn't shatter your heart immediately. Sometimes it simply drains every illusion you've been clinging to. Still, I said nothing. Not because I was weak. Because I needed certainty before I changed the course of my life. And certainty arrived in the cruelest possible way. 3 weeks later, Ethan left his tablet at home. A message appeared on the screen. "Last night was incredible. I already miss you. Har Vanessa." My hands turned cold. Another message appeared before I could even breathe. "When are you finally telling her it's over?" I didn't read another word. I didn't have to. In that instant, 15 years of marriage became 15 years of memories divided into 2 piles. The ones that had been real, and the ones I had imagined. Instead of confronting him, I became quiet. Pain has a way of changing intelligent women into investigators. I met with a lawyer, a financial advisor, a forensic accountant. I learned things about my own marriage that still make my stomach turn. Secret accounts, hidden expenses, luxury gifts, weekend trips disguised as conferences. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, calculated, deliberate. I had every reason to destroy him, but revenge has never interested me. Freedom did. So I began rebuilding my life in silence. While Ethan believed I was grieving our marriage, I was preparing for a future he couldn't even imagine. And that future had led me here, to this ballroom, to this night. I had just taken another sip of sparkling water when a woman's voice cut through the music behind me. "Well, if it isn't Abigail." I closed my eyes for the briefest moment. I'd know that voice anywhere. Vanessa Collins. The woman who believed she had stolen my husband. The woman who had absolutely no idea she was about to meet the new owner of the company where she worked. Vanessa Collins had the kind of confidence that only comes from believing life had rewarded every bad decision she'd ever made. She stood a few feet away from me in an emerald green designer gown that shimmered under the ballroom lights. Her long blonde hair fell in perfect waves over one shoulder, and the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught my attention immediately. I knew exactly where it had come from. Not because I'd ever seen Ethan buy it, but because I'd seen the charge on one of the credit card statements my forensic accountant had uncovered. $14,000. Purchased just 4 days before Christmas. That same Christmas, Ethan had apologized for not buying me a gift. "We should be responsible this year," he'd said. "I don't want us spending money we don't need to." I smiled to myself. Funny how responsibility only seemed to apply when it came to me. Vanessa noticed my eyes lingering on the bracelet. She lifted her wrist ever so slightly. "Beautiful, isn't it?" "It is." I was lucky enough to receive it from someone who appreciates me. I met her gaze. "I'm sure you were." She frowned. She had expected anger, jealousy, tears. Instead, I gave her calm. People who thrive on conflict often don't know what to do when they're denied it. She took another step closer. I honestly didn't think you'd come. I almost didn't. She smiled triumphantly. I figured. It must be difficult. What must be difficult? Watching another woman build the life you thought would always belong to you. Several nearby guests pretended to examine the dessert table while shamelessly listening to every word. Corporate gossip spreads faster than wildfire. By morning, everyone would know what happened tonight. The only question was, which version of the story would they tell? Vanessa folded her arms. I'll give you some advice. I didn't respond. When a man chooses someone else, it's usually because he found someone better. There it was, the sentence she'd probably rehearsed 100 times. She expected it to crush me. Instead, I almost felt sorry for her, because women who measure their worth by being chosen often don't realize how fragile that victory really is. A man willing to betray one woman for you can one day betray you for someone else. She mistook my silence for defeat. You don't have anything to say? I looked around the ballroom before answering. This is a beautiful event. Her smile faltered. I wasn't talking about the ballroom. I know. Then answer me. I looked back at her. Vanessa, I've reached a point where proving anything to you isn't worth my energy. Her expression changed instantly. Confusion, then irritation. Finally, anger. You think you're better than me? No. I think we're making very different choices. Before she could respond, another familiar voice interrupted us. There you are. Ethan. He walked toward us carrying a glass of champagne, smiling at Vanessa with the kind of warmth he hadn't shown me in years. He kissed her cheek without the slightest hesitation, not caring who saw. Not caring that his wife was standing only a few feet away. When he finally looked at me, his smile disappeared. What are you doing here, Abigail? I received an invitation. His jaw tightened. This isn't the place for this. For what? For whatever you're trying to do. I almost laughed. What exactly am I trying to do? You know what I mean. No, Ethan. I honestly don't. He glanced around, clearly aware that people were watching. You've made this difficult enough already. There it was again. The subtle rewriting of history. As though I had somehow caused the collapse of our marriage. As though discovering his affair had been the problem, not having the affair itself. I didn't come here to argue. Then leave. The words landed between us like ice. Several executives standing nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. One older gentleman quietly walked away. Another woman shook her head almost imperceptibly. Even strangers could recognize cruelty when they saw it. Vanessa slipped her arm around Ethan's waist. You heard him. Ethan and I are trying to enjoy the evening. You being here is awkward. Awkward. That was an interesting choice of words. Not heartbreaking. Not painful. Not humiliating. Just awkward. For whom? Certainly not for the man who had lied to me for nearly 2 years. I looked directly at Ethan. I'll leave when I'm ready. His patience snapped. For once in your life, Abigail, stop making everything about yourself. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were true. Because they were so spectacularly false. For 15 years, my world had revolved around him. His promotions. His ambitions. His dreams. I postponed graduate school because he wanted to relocate for work. I turned down a partnership opportunity at an investment firm because his career came first. When his father became ill, I took unpaid leave to help care for him. I had spent years making myself smaller so he could become bigger. And somehow, I had become the selfish one. I realized then that people who refuse to accept responsibility often create a version of reality where they're always the victim. It makes betrayal easier to justify. Vanessa noticed my silence and smiled. I think she finally understands. No. I looked at her calmly. I think I'm finally free. Her smile vanished. Before either of them could respond, I noticed Richard Lawson glance at his watch across the ballroom. Then he caught my eye. A subtle nod. 10 minutes. Only 10 more minutes. The board members were beginning to take their seats near the stage. Charlotte Hayes quietly spoke with the event coordinator. Everything was moving exactly according to schedule. Neither Ethan nor Vanessa noticed. They were too busy enjoying what they believed was their victory. Vanessa leaned closer until I could smell her expensive perfume. If you have any dignity left, walk out now. I held her gaze. No. The single word seemed to ignite something inside her. Her cheeks flushed. You really don't know when you've lost, do you? I smiled gently. No. Vanessa. I know exactly when someone has lost. She opened her mouth to answer. Then, with hundreds of eyes watching, she raised her hand, and in the next heartbeat, everything changed. The instant Vanessa's hand left her side, I knew what she was about to do. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. For some reason, I think a part of me knew that if I moved, she would still find another way to humiliate me. So I stood perfectly still. The slap landed hard against my left cheek. The sharp crack echoed through the ballroom with such force that the string quartet stopped playing in the middle of a song. My champagne glass slipped from my fingers. It shattered against the polished marble floor, the sound ringing through the sudden silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. More than 400 people stared at us in stunned disbelief. The cheerful conversations vanished. The laughter disappeared. Even the servers froze where they stood, trays balanced in their hands. I slowly turned my face back toward Vanessa. My cheek throbbed. I could taste blood where the inside of my lip had scraped against my teeth. Vanessa wasn't finished. Instead of looking ashamed, she smiled. "There," she said loudly enough for dozens of guests to hear. "Maybe now you'll finally understand." A ripple of whispers swept through the ballroom. "Oh my God. Did she really just slap her? Someone call security. I can't believe she did that." I looked at Ethan. Surely this would be the moment he remembered the vows we'd made. The promises. The years we'd shared. Surely he would realize that no matter what had happened between us, allowing another woman to assault his wife was crossing a line. Instead, he sighed, as though he were exhausted by my existence. He walked straight to Vanessa, not to me, to her. He placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "It's okay," he said softly. Then he turned toward me. His eyes were cold, impatient, almost annoyed. "Abigail," he shook his head. "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough?" I stared at him. The words echoed inside me, louder than the slap itself. Embarrassed myself? I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't insulted anyone. I hadn't even defended myself. The only person who had caused a scene was standing safely beneath his arm. Yet somehow, I was still the problem. That realization hurt less than I expected. Not because it wasn't painful, but because it finally answered the question I'd been asking myself for nearly 2 years. When had Ethan stopped loving me? The truth was, it didn't matter anymore. Love doesn't disappear in a single moment. It dies 1,000 quiet deaths. Every ignored phone call, every broken promise, every lie, every excuse, every time someone chooses another person over the one who has stood beside them. Tonight wasn't the beginning of the end. It was simply the moment everyone else finally saw what I'd been living with. Vanessa rested her head against Ethan's shoulder and looked at me with a victorious smile. "You should have listened." She lowered her voice just enough that only I could hear. "He's mine now." I held her gaze. For the first time all evening, I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not an angry one, a peaceful smile. It confused her immediately. "What are you smiling about?" I reached into my handbag. She smirked. "Oh, are you finally going to cry?" Instead of answering, I pulled out a neatly folded white handkerchief. I gently dabbed the small cut on my lip. Then I tucked the handkerchief back into my purse. My hands never trembled. My breathing never changed. That unsettled her more than any argument could have. People expect emotional reactions because they make them feel justified. Calmness forces them to question themselves. Across the ballroom, I noticed Charlotte Hayes already speaking quietly into her headset. Security wasn't being called for me. They were receiving different instructions. Near the stage, Richard Lawson remained perfectly still. Our eyes met. He gave me the slightest nod. 5 minutes. Only 5 minutes remained. Vanessa followed my gaze toward the stage. "What are you looking at?" "The future." She laughed. "You've finally lost it." "No. I've finally found it." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" I looked at him for several seconds before answering. "You'll know soon enough." He scoffed. "You're still playing games." "No, Ethan. I stopped playing games the day I realized our marriage had become one." His expression hardened. "I don't have time for this." He turned toward a passing security supervisor. "Can you please escort her out?" The supervisor hesitated. He looked at me, then toward Charlotte, then back at Ethan. "I'm sorry, sir. I've been instructed not to." Ethan blinked. "What?" The supervisor shifted uncomfortably. "I have different instructions." Confusion spread across Ethan's face. "What instructions?" I'm not at liberty to discuss them. Vanessa laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. Just remove her. Again, the supervisor shook his head. I'm sorry. I can't. I saw the first crack appear in Vanessa's confidence. She glanced around the room. People were watching even more closely now. Something wasn't unfolding the way she expected. Richard Lawson stepped away from the group of board members. He walked slowly toward the stage. An event coordinator handed him a wireless microphone. The lights above the ballroom dimmed slightly. A spotlight illuminated the podium. The master of ceremonies smiled warmly. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have everyone's attention, please. Conversations immediately faded. Guests began moving toward their tables. Executives took their seats. The board members settled into the front row. Richard Lawson stepped behind the podium to thunderous applause. Ethan smiled again. Vanessa squeezed his hand. I told you, she whispered. This is your night. He straightened his tie, smoothed his jacket, completely convinced he was about to hear the announcement that would change his career forever. I remained exactly where I was. My cheeks still burned. My lips still ached. But none of that mattered anymore, because in the next few minutes, the entire ballroom would discover why security had refused to remove me, why Richard Lawson had smiled when he saw me, and why I had walked into that room with absolutely nothing left to prove. Richard adjusted the microphone. He smiled at the audience. Then he spoke the words that would change every life in that ballroom forever. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, we celebrate the beginning of a brand new chapter in the history of Lawson Technologies. A hush settled over the ballroom, the kind of silence that only happens when hundreds of people know they're about to witness something important. Richard Lawson stood behind the podium, his hands resting lightly on either side of it. At 67, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent more than 4 decades building one of Chicago's most respected technology companies. He looked across the room, smiling at familiar faces. I want to thank every one of you for being here tonight, he began. When I founded Lawson Technologies 43 years ago, I had one employee, a rented office with leaky windows, and a dream that most people thought was impossible. Soft laughter rippled through the room. I've watched this company grow through recessions, technological revolutions, and challenges that tested every one of us. But no matter what we faced, one thing remained constant: our belief that integrity matters more than shortcuts. His eyes briefly swept across the audience. For just a fraction of a second, they rested on Ethan. Then they moved on. I've been asked many times over the last year who would take over after my retirement. A few guests smiled knowingly. Everyone had been asking that question, including Ethan, especially Ethan. Standing only a few feet away from me, he adjusted the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo. His shoulders were back, his chin was lifted. He looked exactly like a man expecting to hear his own name. Vanessa leaned closer and whispered, "Just imagine, Executive Vice President." He smiled without taking his eyes off the stage. "We're finally here." I lowered my gaze, hiding the faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. If they only knew, Richard continued. I've received offers from multinational corporations, private equity firms, and investment groups willing to pay extraordinary amounts of money. He paused. But I wasn't looking for the highest bidder. The room became even quieter. I was looking for the right steward. Someone near the front nodded. Richard reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small folded card. The agreement was finalized 48 hours ago. I heard Ethan inhale sharply. Vanessa squeezed his hand so tightly I could see her knuckles turn white. She was already celebrating, already imagining the office they would decorate together, already picturing herself as the powerful woman everyone would have to impress. She had no idea her dream was about to collapse. Richard smiled warmly. The person I selected impressed not only me, but every member of our board. He glanced toward the front row. Several board members nodded in agreement. This individual demonstrated extraordinary financial expertise. Another pause. Remarkable leadership. And, most importantly, unshakable integrity. The word integrity lingered in the air. I couldn't help noticing Ethan's smile falter for the first time. Perhaps because deep down, he knew integrity wasn't a word anyone would use to describe the choices he'd made over the past 2 years. Richard unfolded the card. I am honored to introduce the new majority owner of Lawson Technologies. He looked directly at me. Ms. Abigail Morgan. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. The entire ballroom froze. It was as if time itself had stopped. Then hundreds of heads turned toward me at once. The silence was almost surreal. Vanessa blinked. Once. Twice. Then she laughed nervously. There must be another Abigail Morgan. No one answered. Ethan stared at me, his face draining of color. What? It was barely a whisper. Richard stepped away from the podium and extended his hand toward me. Abigail, he said with genuine warmth, would you join me on stage? I placed my clutch on a nearby table and walked forward. Every step echoed against the marble floor. No one moved. No one spoke. The same people who had watched me be slapped less than 10 minutes earlier now stepped aside, creating a clear path to the stage. As I walked past Ethan, he instinctively reached for my wrist. Abigail? His voice trembled. I looked down at his hand, then back into his eyes. Without saying a word, I gently moved my arm away and continued walking. For 15 years, I had followed behind him. Tonight, he would be the one left behind. When I reached the stage, Richard greeted me with a warm handshake. I'm proud to welcome you, he said into the microphone, as the new owner and chief executive officer of Lawson Technologies. The applause began slowly. Then it grew. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was standing. The sound was thunderous. Everyone applauded, except two people, Ethan and Vanessa. Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked from me, to Richard, to the board members, as though desperately searching for someone to tell her this was a joke. It wasn't. Richard handed me the microphone. I believe everyone would like to hear from you. I accepted it with steady hands. For a moment, I simply looked around the room. Some faces were smiling, others looked stunned. A few employees had tears in their eyes. Then my gaze settled on Ethan. He wasn't looking at me the way a husband looks at his wife. He was looking at me the way a man looks at an opportunity he never imagined losing. I finally spoke. Thank you, Richard. My first priority is to thank every employee who has helped make Lawson Technologies the company it is today. Another round of applause filled the ballroom. I know tonight has already been memorable. Soft laughter eased some of the tension. I won't discuss personal matters. Because tonight isn't about my personal life. It's about the future of this company. I paused. Then I said the words that made the room fall silent again. But I will leave you with one thought. The easiest way to discover someone's true character is to watch how they treat the person they believe has no power. I let the words settle over the room. Several employees slowly turned their heads toward Ethan and Vanessa. Neither of them could meet anyone's eyes. I smiled gently. And I promise every person who works here that, under my leadership, respect will never depend on job titles, favoritism, or who someone is dating. The applause that followed was louder than anything I'd heard all night. But I noticed something even more powerful. Charlotte Hayes was already walking toward Ethan and Vanessa. In her hands were 2 sealed envelopes. And judging by the look on her face, the evening was far from over. The applause continued long after I stepped away from the microphone. It wasn't applause for me. Not entirely. It was applause for hope. For months, perhaps even years, the employees of Lawson Technologies had watched the culture of the company slowly change. Promotions that once rewarded hard work had begun favoring loyalty to the wrong people. Rumors had replaced transparency. Fear had quietly taken the place of trust. They hadn't known why. Now they did. As the applause finally faded, Charlotte Hayes approached Ethan and Vanessa with calm, measured steps. She had worked at Lawson Technologies for nearly 28 years. She had seen brilliant leaders rise and arrogant ones fall. Nothing about her expression suggested satisfaction, only duty. Ethan, she said professionally. Vanessa, may I speak with you for a moment? Vanessa forced a laugh. I'm sure whatever this is can wait until after the celebration. Charlotte didn't smile. I'm afraid it can't. Every conversation in the ballroom stopped again. People weren't pretending not to watch anymore. They were openly watching. Charlotte handed Ethan the first envelope. This is a formal notice from the board of directors. His confident smile disappeared. He looked at me briefly before opening it. The further he read, the paler he became. What is this? His voice was barely audible. Charlotte answered without emotion. Effective immediately, you are being placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Murmurs spread across the ballroom. Ethan looked stunned. There has to be a mistake. There isn't, Charlotte continued. The investigation concerns allegations of conflicts of interest, misuse of company resources, unauthorized disclosure of confidential information, and repeated attempts to influence hiring and promotion decisions for personal relationships. The room grew so quiet that I could hear someone set down a champagne glass. Ethan looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. I've done nothing illegal. No conclusions have been reached, Charlotte replied. The investigation will determine the facts. She turned toward Vanessa. And this is for you. Vanessa opened her envelope. Within seconds, tears welled in her eyes. No! Her voice cracked. This can't be happening. Charlotte spoke gently but firmly. Pending the outcome of the investigation, your employment has also been suspended. Vanessa looked around desperately. There must be some misunderstanding. There isn't. She turned to Ethan. Do something. He couldn't. For the first time since I'd met him 20 years earlier, Ethan had no answer. No speech. No confident smile. No clever explanation. Just silence. The silence of a man finally realizing that every shortcut eventually leads somewhere, and usually, it leads to consequences. He suddenly walked toward me. Abigail. His voice trembled in a way I'd never heard before. Please. I looked at him calmly. Can we talk? Just 5 minutes. The ballroom seemed to disappear around us. For a moment, it felt like we were the only 2 people in the room. I studied the face I had once loved without question. The same blue eyes. The same familiar voice. But I no longer felt the desperate need for his approval. That freedom surprised me. I don't think there's anything left to say. There is. His eyes filled with tears. I made a terrible mistake. I held his gaze. No, Ethan. You made thousands of them. They just started with one choice. He lowered his head. I never thought... He stopped. Never thought what? I never thought you'd actually leave. His words settled heavily between us. There it was. The truth. Not that he loved me too much to let me go, but that he believed I'd never have the courage to walk away. He had mistaken my loyalty for weakness, my patience for dependence, my forgiveness for permission. I waited for you for a long time, I said quietly. I waited for you to tell me the truth. I waited for you to remember who we used to be. I waited for you to choose us. I paused. But while I was waiting, you were already building another life. He covered his face with one hand. I'm sorry. For the first time, I believed he meant it. Not because he'd lost his job. Not because he'd lost his promotion. But because he'd finally lost the illusion that he could have everything without losing anything. I'm glad you're sorry, I said. I truly am. I hope you become a better man. His shoulders shook as he fought back tears. But I can't be the reward waiting at the end of that journey. He nodded slowly. I understand. I should have understood much sooner. He turned to leave, then stopped. Did you buy the company because of me? I smiled softly. No, I bought it because it was an incredible company. I refused to let one disappointing man become the reason I made the biggest business decision of my life. For a second, he almost smiled. A sad smile. The kind people wear when they finally understand a lesson that arrived too late. You always were the smartest person in the room. I shook my head. No. I just finally stopped pretending I wasn't. He looked at me for one last moment, before quietly walking away. Across the ballroom, Vanessa stood alone near the entrance. She had spent nearly 2 years believing she had won. Now she wasn't even sure where to go. She glanced at me once. Our eyes met. I expected anger. Instead, I saw fear. And something else. Regret. She looked away first. As she walked out of the ballroom without another word, I realized something that surprised even me. I didn't hate her. Hate would have kept me connected to the worst chapter of my life. I wanted something far more valuable. Peace. Richard Lawson stepped beside me with 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to me. You handled that better than most people would have. I smiled. I learned a long time ago that revenge is loud. He raised an eyebrow. And justice? I looked around the ballroom filled with employees who were laughing again, talking again, believing again. Justice, I answered quietly, doesn't need to raise its voice. Richard smiled. I knew I chose the right person. I looked out across the company that was now my responsibility. For years I thought losing my marriage would destroy me. Instead, it had quietly led me to the greatest opportunity of my life. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't looking back anymore. 1 year later, I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office on the 32nd floor of Lawson Technologies. watching the first snow of December drift over downtown Chicago. The city looked peaceful. Cars crawled along Michigan Avenue, their headlights glowing against the white streets below. Lake Michigan shimmered beneath a gray winter sky, and for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed. Peace. Not the kind that comes from everything going your way. The kind that comes from knowing you survived everything that was meant to break you. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. "Come in." Charlotte Hayes stepped inside carrying a thick blue folder. She smiled. "I thought you'd want to see these before the board meeting." I took the folder from her and opened it. Inside were the company's year-end performance reports. Revenue had increased by 28%. Employee turnover had fallen to its lowest level in nearly 15 years. Customer satisfaction had reached an all-time high. For the first time in company history, every full-time employee would receive a year-end profit-sharing bonus. I looked up. "This belongs to everyone." Charlotte nodded. "They know that." She hesitated before adding, "Do you know what employees say most often now?" I smiled. "What?" "They say they finally feel safe coming to work." Those words meant more to me than every financial report in the folder. Because that had been my goal from the very beginning. Not simply to build a profitable company, but to build a place where integrity mattered more than influence, where promotions were earned, where no one had to fear favoritism, where respect wasn't reserved for people with impressive titles. Charlotte turned toward the door. "Oh, one more thing." She handed me a cream-colored envelope. "No return address. I thought you'd want to read it privately." After she left, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. I recognized Ethan's handwriting immediately. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. Instead, I began to read. "Dear Abigail, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, and I'm not writing because I expect you to. I'm writing because I've spent the last year learning what accountability actually means. After I lost my job, I blamed everyone except myself. Then I ran out of people to blame. I've been working for a small manufacturing company outside Milwaukee. The pay is nowhere near what I once earned, but for the first time in years, I'm earning every dollar honestly. Therapy forced me to face a version of myself I didn't want to admit existed. I became arrogant, entitled. I confused admiration with love and attention with respect. By the time I realized what I had thrown away, it was already too late. I heard Lawson Technologies had its best year in company history. I'm genuinely happy for you. You deserved every success long before I recognized your worth. Thank you for never humiliating me publicly when you easily could have. You taught me more through your dignity than revenge ever could have. I hope one day I become someone worthy of the forgiveness you've already shown me. Take care." Ethan, I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. Then I locked it in the bottom drawer of my desk. Not because I wanted to keep revisiting the past, but because it reminded me of something important. People can change. Sometimes they truly do. But their change doesn't require you to return to the life you already outgrew. A week later, Lawson Technologies held its annual holiday celebration. Richard Lawson attended as a guest of honor. When he saw me, he smiled proudly. "I've built companies for over 40 years," he said. "But this?" He looked around at employees laughing with their families. "This is the legacy I hoped someone would protect." I hugged him warmly. "You trusted the right person." "No," he replied with a chuckle. "I simply recognized someone who had been underestimated." Later that evening, I stepped onto the same ballroom stage where everything had changed exactly 1 year earlier. The memories returned instantly. The music, the lights, the whispers, the slap. For a brief moment, I could almost see the frightened woman I had been standing near the entrance. I wished I could reach back through time and whisper something in her ear. "Hold on. The pain you're feeling tonight is not the end of your story. One day you'll realize you weren't being rejected from your future. You were being redirected toward it." The applause brought me back to the present. I smiled at the hundreds of employees gathered before me. "A year ago," I began, "I stood in this room during one of the hardest moments of my life." The ballroom grew quiet. I thought I had lost everything. I paused. But life has a funny way of revealing the truth. Sometimes the very thing that shatters your heart is the thing that opens the door to the life you were always meant to live. Heads nodded throughout the room. I learned that success isn't getting even. It's getting free. It's waking up without anger. It's refusing to let someone else's betrayal become your identity. It's choosing your peace over your pride. The room erupted into applause. I looked across the ballroom. Every face reflected hope instead of fear, respect instead of gossip, unity instead of division. As the celebration continued, I quietly stepped onto the balcony overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline. Snowflakes landed softly on the railing. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cold winter air. A year ago, I walked into this hotel believing my life had fallen apart. Now I understood the truth. It hadn't fallen apart. It had fallen into place. I didn't win because I bought the company. I won because I stopped begging for a seat at a table where I was no longer respected and built one where everyone had a place. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from and share the lesson that stayed with you the most in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story. And always remember, the greatest comeback isn't making the people who hurt you regret losing you. It's becoming so whole, so peaceful, and so fulfilled that their opinion no longer has the power to define your future.